long-term impact of the pandemic on cities, on downtowns, and particularly on Washington. So we have Teresa Shiels and Bob Peck with us. So Teresa is a co-managing director and principal at Gensler. She manages large project and consultant teams and serves as a strategic advisor to clients with multiple stakeholders. She's a strong proponent of sustainable design, and her portfolio spans notable domestic and international projects in the areas of hospitality, corporate headquarters, and education, among others. And Bob is no stranger to Lambda Alpha. You spoke with us a couple of years ago on the open space, open office design trends. Bob is co-leader of Gensler's government and defense practice. He served for 8 years as commissioner of the USGSA Public Building Service. He's also been a land use attorney, a commercial real estate mortgage banker and broker, served as president of the Greater Washington Board of Trade and vice president for public affairs at AIA. So with that, I will turn the microphone over to Teresa.
And I would just mention, if you want to type, if you have a question during the presentation, you can always type it in the chat box and we'll get to them when they complete their presentation. And so Bob and Teresa, after you're done, we'll hope you'll have some time to answer questions.
Okay.
Sure, of course.
Good. Let me work on sharing my screen.
Okay. I assume everyone can see it. So again, I'm Bob Peck. I'm actually, Lisa, speaking of dues, I'm a somewhat lapsed Lambda Alpha member, so I owe you. It's so nice to see everybody from, say I'm looking at Maybelle Bennett, before whom I appeared when I was a zoning attorney. You were a great chair and very fair. And all these other, so many friends from different aspects of my career. We do want to talk about the reset of cities post-pandemic, and we're going to talk about that some. And I think what you'll see us talking about are some trends, many of which started before the pandemic. And we're not just going to talk about the pandemic. There are other trends, including diversity, equity, and inclusion, that are trends that we want to talk about in cities. We're going to talk about everything from the future of transportation and networking to the cities themselves. So we'll, with a brief introduction of who Gensler is, a little shameless marketing before we dive totally in. Many of you know who we are. We're a large firm. We're in 51 offices around the world, a lot of people. And I always love to note that we're 100% employee owned. It's a firm with a great culture. And the only reason to sort of note, Teresa, go to the next slide, is if you look at our offices around the world, you know, sometimes we say, who cares that we've got offices everywhere? We're the DC office. We've been here since 1982. And what does the fact that we have an office in Singapore mean to anybody here? And it's that, as we'll show, some of the trends that we're looking at are trends that we think are global trends that have to do with cities. And we want to talk about those and what they may mean for Washington, even though we know Washington is unique in so many ways. So with that, I've been talking about the DC office. Teresa is the co-leader of our office, and we're going to dive into where we think cities are going.
Thanks, Bob. And really, you know, it is about forward thinking and not the doom and gloom of the pandemic. It's really, what can we take from the pandemic, lessons learned, and as Bob said, what were we already doing before pandemic, and looking at strategies to really help grow healthy, equitable communities. And so we wanted to just touch on real quick 8 ideas on these strategies for livable cities. And we'll run through each of those, some in a little more detail. So the first one is really, how do we create and sustain a sustainable and inclusive environment? And how is it regenerative? And what are the aspects that we need to do that? You know, walkability. And we're going to talk about this idea of a 20-minute equitable community neighborhood, proximity to nature. We're going to touch on public spaces and how important those are, not just in a big singular public space that everybody needs to gather to, but public spaces that are close to neighborhoods. And then really, how do you create this flexibility so that you can adapt as things happen in the future? And then the second one, the second idea is this idea of intergenerational cities and neighborhoods. And how do you take a neighborhood and a community and not make it the area for the millennials, or, you know, grow people out of the neighborhood? How do you make it really a diverse and intergenerational community? So how do you have, you know, how do you look at abilities and access for abilities? How do you look at, you know, groceries, healthcare? And that again is part of this idea about the 20-minute community, but in an intergenerational and diverse way, so that you're getting all sorts of opinions and it's not really just a one view of life, because that's who the community has grown for.
So one of the ways in which we talk about that is in encouraging polycentricity. Polycentricity and obviously density and compactness. I don't need to tell a lambda alpha crowd at all about the difference between single uses and sprawl and bringing people together and uses together in a way that is conservation oriented, because the closer in everybody is, the more the infrastructure can cover it in the right way. Enhancing walkability, which I think we've all learned in the pandemic, this is an effect, that being able to walk someplace as opposed to having to get into a car or a bus or other forms of mass transit is an advantage in lots of ways, and creating that compactness is important. The other note we'll make, and in the Washington area, I think in many ways we've been a forerunner of this, is the creation of activity centers that aren't just downtown. So we're talking about city centers a lot, but we're going to talk about the fact that urban centers, as we know, can be in other places as well. So it's obviously this happens to be, as you can tell, near the ballpark, a district that is becoming denser and denser, and creating a community in which it's possible to walk to things. And as Teresa noted, to a grocery, to shops, to restaurants. It's become a part of the city that is a little bit its own downtown. This is the kind of the example of a 20-minute walkable city and neighborhood that we are talking about. And you know, you can everybody on this call knows how recent it's been, that recent a development this has been, anchored in part by the ballpark and the yards. So the other aspect of that we think is coming and is interesting, and technology. So if the pandemic has taught us anything, and we all know there's an upside and a downside to this, there are a lot more things that we can do using technology than we thought we could do before. And it means that there's a little bit more of an interpenetration, clearly, of work and home, and a little bit more of a penetration of, you know, where the services get delivered. We're going to talk in a little bit about the fact that no, we don't think that everybody is going to stay home just on their computers and forever live like we are at this moment, you know, in the Hollywood Squares screen, and living our whole lives that way. But there's a further use of technology that we think is coming. And you can see from the bottom of the screen going up, what everybody has been talking, you know, people have called the smart city. The possibility that technology can help us develop infrastructure better, tie it into a better ecological framework, tie it to mobility, the opportunity for us to move people, to let people know how the system is working, where the nodes are clogged up, where they aren't, tying in building energy usage through the use of technology, allowing people again to use retail. We'll hear about this next month, I have a feeling. In-person retail has a sort of a different thing going on than it used to. We go online and figure out what we want to do, and then if we got to go actually feel like we got to touch it, we go into to do it ourselves, and all of it tied together. Let's all note that there's a scary side to this. You know, we all worry about a little bit about a loss of privacy, but and there are issues with it, but there are opportunities here for connecting people in ways they couldn't before. And finally, there is this equity side to this as well. If we can make sure that everybody has access to the technology, we can tie people together in ways that they couldn't have been tied before. But that's a big if we provide that access, whether it's in a library or in a home, we need to make sure everyone and every business is connected.
And then, as I touched on earlier, you know, Bob and I were talking about this. We live at the biggest green space of all, you know, with the National Mall. But does somebody in Anacostia think, let's just run over to the mall and, you know, hang out at the mall? And so how do we make smaller open spaces that are shared in these other communities so that it's not just this one centralized space that people have to gather to? Not that that's bad, but not to the detriment and exclusion of these small other spaces that actually allow increased proximity to them and that connect and make part of these smaller communities and cities and urban spaces, so that it's not having to turn something into a big effort to get to that green space, and how that allows us to change for new needs with this idea of the dispersed public realm and shared parks. And then from a building perspective, how do we look at buildings from this idea of day and night use? How do we look at these ground floor spaces? Can they flow into into the street? Can they open up to, even if they're a business space, can they open up and welcome the street and the community? And then around the streets themselves, you know, here's sort of what we have now, but we're already seeing not this picture, we're seeing this picture, right? We're seeing the scooters, the bikes, the rollerblades, the Ubers, the, you know, soon, at some point soon, driverless cars. We've got the bus lanes in DC. We've got the car lanes. And so how do you continue to make these types of spaces work in the cities and the streets and the neighborhoods to accommodate all these types of transportation for pedestrians and non-car access and activities? And then this is one of my favorites because, you know, the pandemic almost forced this on neighborhoods, right? Where businesses weren't able to have people into the space. So they put the restaurants and the coffee shops out on the streets in the parking spaces, and kind of this idea of taking the streets over with community spaces. And, you know, I think one of the greatest things that can come out of this is, can this become then a permanent solution with permanent ideas where we're actually taking back the streets for public spaces and for neighborhoods, even if they are for private businesses. You want to take this one, Bob?
Yep. So I just want to note, I hope everybody noticed that previous slide was the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So you know, if in Los Angeles they are talking about taking back the street and pedestrianizing, you know that it's a trend that's really gone places. That's a real project, and apparently is going to happen. So here, you know, this relates back to what I started to say, that reimagining is essential, and we've crossed out business district, because that really did imply a single use that you know, when you think about the arc of history, it's such an anomaly that for a while we thought that the business part of a city was just a business part of a city. I mean, that's something that happened for 80 or 100 years in our country and around the world. Didn't really happen before because you had to have a 20-minute walkable city. You didn't have much option unless you were rich enough to have a carriage, I guess. And what's going on now. So we're talking about reimagining the, we still call it a CBD, but with much more diversity, a lot of greenery. I think the pandemic has taught us, as Teresa was noting, more permeability between the ground, the inside and the outside, because everybody wants better air quality inside, and the best way to get air quality inside, quite honestly, is to take air from the outside. And we feel like people are going to want that kind of comfort level of being able to go outside when they can, and bring that into the buildings. Just a lot more density, a lot more street activity, and some sense of safety by just having a lot of people around, and again, being able to go outside. And notice that was at Tyson's Corner. And so to go back to the point that, you know, polycentricity, that we are talking about places in our region. You know, I'm old enough, when I grew up, Tyson's Corner was a field, but it's a very different place, and aspires to being an urban place. As I know some of you on this call have worked on that for a long time. I'm talking about you, Robert Atkinson, but anyway, well.
Nothing like calling people out on the call, Bob.
So again, so the central business district is no longer just a business district. I'm not going to read the list. You can. It's that district, and it's everywhere. It's a connected community that includes all of these different uses in one place. And perhaps someday we'll just stop talking about it as a business district and think more about it as a community center. And so, as we've noted, we think that the pandemic is just sort of taking these trends that were already happening and putting them on steroids. And I note, and I'm sure some of you will ask the question, you know, there is a worry, and we're going to get to that. I don't know that we have the full answer. The worry is, will people congregate together? Do they want to go downtown? Do they want to have a physical community and not just this virtual community? We think the answer is yes. We think it leads to a greater mix of uses. We're going to have to be imaginative about how we bring people into a central business district, and you know, how do we make it feel kind of local? Again, this outdoor-indoor combination we think is something new that's going to grow. And then one thing just at the bottom, we should note a little bit that we've seen around the country, this migration of second-tier satellite cities. We don't want to talk about housing today, but the opportunity to work virtually has meant that cities like Nashville, where you see in the upper right a big mixed-use project, have become a lot more attractive. We're in competition with those cities, and to some extent, even our suburban centers are becoming relatively expensive. And as a region, I feel like we need to be aware of what's going on and think hard about how we create a region that people can afford to live in, and provide opportunities for everybody in the region. So we have a research institute, and like, we're not the only ones, but we've been doing a decent amount of surveying in the last year to try to figure out where things are going. We've done workplace surveys in the US, UK, Asia, and we are trying to figure out, what do people want? Next. Well, so here's an interesting thing. Everybody wants to know, so this doesn't tell you what's going to happen, but it does tell you, as of early last fall, where people who had been home for several months working, what they now thought about the work week. So, you know, we're saying it's not a central business district, but on the other hand, in Washington in particular, you know, our central business district has partly survived on, or, you know, thrived on having so many people coming in from elsewhere to work there. So here are the numbers, you can see them. The bottom line number is the interesting one. 52% of workers would prefer a hybrid work model, meaning working from home between 1 and 4 days a week. And generally it does sort of devolve into I want to be home 2 to 3 days a week. I want the flexibility to deal with my kids if I've got kids. I don't want to have to commute every single day. I want to, and I've learned that I can, if I have what we call heads down work to do, I can do it as well from home as anywhere else. But there aren't that many people, look on the right, who really want to stay home all the time. And there's about 1/3 of the people who'd really like to spend all of their time in the office. Now, why do people say they want to come back to work? The answer is what you'd expect. They miss other people. We're social animals. They miss collaborating that way. Managers and employees seem to feel like more creative work gets done when people are bumping into each other at work.
And one of the things Bob said about this slide is key. It's a survey in time, right? And I think, you know, he's going to talk a little bit about this, but this is also a survey in time. And I've already seen, and we've already seen, and you've already seen some of these that are in the red start to get a little more comfortable for folks.
Yeah, here, what this slide shows is what are people more comfortable doing together now in this going out, and what are they less comfortable doing? So there are some variations. Again, we'll share this with you. I saw your question, Sally. And there is clearly everybody's starting to feel comfortable about going grocery shopping, returning to work. It's partly comfortable and partly, golly, I really want to just do this. And if you, but you know, there are some cautions here. The things that are lagging, except in Singapore, for example, are using mass transit. A big issue for many people who are watching this presentation, I know, even using rideshare services, going to the gym, flying. So there are a number of issues here with getting together, particularly with respect to transportation. And our note is that just means that walkable destinations, the 20-minute city, are even more important. So there is this opportunity to create more resilience. You know, I think a lot in the back of our minds, a lot of people are going to be thinking this may not be the last health scare that we have in our lifetime. There are certainly worries about climate change that also mean that people are concerned. More severe weather may mean that the offices we want to go to are ruined for a while. I mean, look at what happened just recently happened in Texas. So I think there's a lot of concern about creating resilient sort of downtowns, resilient lifestyles that mean that maybe I do have to work from home again without a choice if something happens. So anyway, it's just an imperative that we think that people are going to have to take into consideration. But as you know, it's kind of that famous Rahm Emanuel note when Barack Obama became president, you know, never let a crisis go to waste. So how can we use this in a way to create a resilient central business district that does all of those kinds of things that we were talking about before? So again, there's an opportunity to take us away from the fact that you always had to go downtown to work. You can do it from different places. So more polycentric means that you can have downtowns outside of the traditional downtown, different kinds of business clusters outside the city, more amenity spaces, and a lot more creativity in thinking through how we live our lives, how we get our shopping and work done.
Did my next slide come up on diversity?
Yeah, it just did. So there you again, you saw something at Tyson's. This happens to be in China. There is a little bit of a global aspect to this. Again, you see outdoor spaces, small outdoor spaces that help create community, in an area in which there's also retail and some business next to a high-rise district. Next. And the same idea, just that we can be more connected. Again, in the UK, and we wanted to show these in part just to show this, is there's a lot of similar thinking going on around the world. And again, I think it's important in Washington. You know, I love the slide Teresa showed, that we have often in Washington so focused on our squares run by the, you know, the feds and the mall, that we have not created enough of our own smaller urban spaces that people can really relate to. And again, people want to get outside. A couple of other trends we should just note in the middle: eds and meds, education and healthcare are the big industries that are still building things and still creating workplaces that are important, they're robust in this recovering economy. And there are an awful lot of projects in cities all over that have to do with that. Finally, we just note again that there's culture and entertainment is something that's really big in creating spaces that people want to go to, and a lot of it in sustainable outdoor and indoor spaces. And finally, this is a project in Pittsburgh, which has been a pretty nice urban laboratory for quite some time, moving out of the industrial age, but creating places that are authentic to the city itself in a walkable neighborhood. Homegrown, just to note this, that there's an opportunity here. I know everyone on this call, we all think about land use in sort of in a zoning map way often, but there's an opportunity to promote homegrown retail in a lot of these spaces, and dispersed retail that will maybe break down some of the big international retail conglomerates into something that's more accessible to people who are trying to start their own businesses, and spark some of these smaller clusters of retail, work, and living.
And I think just I can jump in on this one, Bob. And then I think, you know, we were talking about, you know, it's not just cities, but where can this change happen? And is it happening at a building level with the air and the amenities? Is it happening at a block level within a space or within a district? And it's not just a city, right? It can be these urban areas that are growing, that have these amenities and that have these changes that are happening, that are creating critical mass of people and activity around an area. And so this really gets us to this idea of an equitable 20-minute neighborhood. And we say equitable 20-minute neighborhood because you can have a 20-minute neighborhood, but if you don't have affordable housing and grocery stores with healthy food, then that's not an equitable neighborhood. It's an exclusive neighborhood. And so, you know, the walkability is critical, right? This ability to have access to public transportation, even if people aren't really necessarily comfortable yet going there. Diversity in housing, whether it's single family or apartments or condos, and then employment rate where you're at, so that, as Bob said, that you can walk to work if possible. And then healthcare, right? Healthcare is critical. You know, I live a block from Whitman Walker, and I see people in there all the time. And I love that that is part of the community, that you don't have to go to some hospital all the way across at Sibley. But then all these things equate to that idea of this 20-minute neighborhood, and an equitable one. But not only is there this walking shed of an area, but also a bicycle shed. And then can we even think farther and look at this idea of you know, an aerial ride shed, you know, beyond sort of the Uber, you know, all these different types of transportation, whether it's on foot or by bike or by scooter or Segway or Metro. And how does that start to give another radius, another circle within the smaller communal circle of neighborhood? And then how do these 20-minute cities focus on, like I mentioned, the comfort and health of the inhabitants through the healthcare and the public spaces that are accessible within this small area, the parks, the clinics. And then how do you connect people in all these neighborhoods to these resources? Because just having them within that area, how do you make sure that people are using them and connecting to them? Because, you know, in some, you know, to be equitable, are there areas in neighborhoods that, you know, don't have great access to internet, don't have the knowledge that there is healthcare right near them, or that they have access within a close neighborhood in proximity to have access to healthy foods. And so connecting people to these services and resources is just as important as having them. And then we've talked a lot about public spaces, and really culture is king, right? Because that is where people come together. That is where you walk out the door of your house, off your Zoom call, and have, you know, you have arts, you have outdoor performances, and we're seeing these now. We're seeing these already. I have a friend who always posts her, I don't know if it's Zumba or if it's jazzercise or if it's, what is it, but it's this huge public dance group that meets every Saturday morning at Meridian Hill Park and just gets out there, along with a bar class that I've taken in that park. And so how do you take these outdoor spaces, really connect them to fitness, connect them to wellness, and connect them to culture? And that is the first step, sort of walking out our doors, I think, in this post-pandemic era. And then these tertiary spaces between buildings and the streets as well.
And finally, we do think that public transportation, we're all talking about biking and scootering and walking. And you did note that there's that reluctance right now to go back into mass transit, but it seems to be shifting even as we're sitting here. That investments in public transportation infrastructure, in part because it widens that 20-minute shed. I mean, we all say people are going to, walk and bike within a certain radius, but being able to get on transit and go someplace else to another neighborhood that may have different kinds of amenities, different cultural activities, is clearly still important to us. And we think that there's an opportunity, whether or not the Biden administration infrastructure plan passes, we think that there's a renewed emphasis going to be on upgrading the transportation infrastructure we've had. In this region, clearly there are lots of great initiatives underway, and they will, as we all learn, we were surprised in many ways when Metro didn't end up serving certain areas. There are all kinds of historical reasons for that. But we'll note that there's, even yesterday, the Washington Post announced this Greater Washington Partnership vision that we participated in to try to link up MARC on the north, VRE on the south with Metro to create a real regional commuter rail system. And that, if you build it, we know about transit, they will come. And it could link up our region in a way that we've never been able to imagine before. And it's, it's a really exciting possibility. It's interesting that it's coming out now. I think a lot of people have had a lot of time to cogitate for the last year and think about how can things be better when we all get out again. And we think this is one of the great opportunities we've now got.
And so that's just sort of an overview of things that we as a firm and through our research groups have been thinking about. And actually, you may say, well, there's a lot of renderings in here. These are all projects that we're in the midst of building. And so it's not just about ideas, it's also about turning this into realities as we kind of face this new time, and taking the great things and the things that haven't really worked during the pandemic and really pivoting and having this great opportunity to reset how our communities work.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
And I hope you have time
Yeah.
A couple of nice questions in the chat, so I hope we have time to.
Right. So Pamela Hill has asked, how do you get the marginalized community involvement in this planning process? Surveys and other methods have long been shown to be not effective.
I'm sorry, the last part of it?
The surveys and other methods have long been shown to not be effective methods in involving marginalized communities.
Oh, you know, I've been involved. Well, we've all been involved. Almost everybody here has been involved in planning efforts for a long time. I agree that surveys don't work. I think, however, but I'd love to hear your feedback, getting out in the community on the projects that I've worked on in my career in which we've had a community meeting when we've actually been in the community and work with a local community group to try to get people to come talk about what's being planned for their community. You know, just sort of says again, in person makes a difference. And I think in marginalized communities, that's probably the best way to reach out, but I'd love to hear what you think. I will say that we've been talking to some governments now about coming out of the pandemic, that we've all learned that you can have an NCPC meeting that's virtual or a zoning commission meeting that's virtual. It allows some people to participate in ways they couldn't before. They don't have to take off of work and sit in a room for 4 hours waiting for their turn to testify. But again, that requires that they have an internet connection and good access. So I still think getting out there and doing real public engagement is the way to do it face to face.
And I would just add, we have been doing so much more for exactly that reason, partnering with, because as you know, or may not know, our office does work across the country and the world, right? So we are not so cocky that we think we know neighborhoods and areas. And we have been partnering a lot with local communities, bringing on local entities through our consulting groups, also with other architects, so that we can have people say to us, that doesn't work, that doesn't work here. This is how our community operates. And so not just coming in as the big firm with big ideas, but also partnering with local firms that have local roots and saying, here, let us take that in. How can we adapt what our thinking is to what will work here? Because we believe in these ideas, and it's just how do you adapt them for where they're going.
Mm-hmm. So Patty Nickerson has asked, are you seeing the district starting to do this kind of planning?
I'll note one thing that I thought was intriguing. The DDOT had in one of their planning workshops about what to do about K Street downtown. This is not exactly a marginalized neighborhood, but they had an outdoor event in Farragut Square where they put up panels that showed some plans and got just people walking by, because that was an interesting view of what a constituency is. Just folks who hang out in Farragut and walk down K Street. What do you think about this area? What would make it better for you? I was impressed. Anyway, I don't know. I can't say in all of the work that's been going on the comp plan and all of that. I don't know that other people on this call probably know better than I do whether the district is reaching out that way. I mean, I know there are enough community meetings, ANC meetings going on all the time. Whether that's effective outreach, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask a question with my voice?
Yes.
This morning I was talking with a couple of women, and we were talking about the nice weather and going out walking. And I live in DC in the Kalorama Sheridan neighborhood. And we talked about going to Rock Creek Park. And I said, well, I would never go to Rock Creek Park by myself. And the other woman said the same thing. So I was just listening to your weaving together all of these different elements, whether, it would be so wonderful if Rock Creek Park could open up and have more of the retail and if the federal government, I see the mall, it looks like you can do it on the mall, but whether you could do more of this kind of thing in Rock Creek Park.
I actually think that's a great idea, Patricia, because I actually, on weekends, I used to walk, but now I drive over to Beach Drive when they close down the roads through Rock Creek, and I feel like I'm in a different area, and it's very safe. It's not, there's not all these other pieces, but I love that because they have cars are allowed, but also bicyclists and walkers and kids on rollerblades have the right of way, and you almost feel like you're transformed into a different area. And I would love to see more of that, and also how we could incorporate that in those types of areas. Now, would I go hiking through Rock Creek Park by myself? Maybe, maybe not, but I could certainly see why people wouldn't. But we just did a competition for Dupont Circle. And Reimagining Dupont Circle in the district. And I think it was put out by Dupont, the Dupont Underground. And we had a very small intervention to the circle, but it was an intervention about lighting and audio and performances. And it wasn't taking anything away from the public realm. It was actually celebrating it, but allowing that celebration to take place more hours of the day throughout that area, so that there was this idea of safety. So I think the things you're bringing up are things we have to think about in all these cases.
And I think I just think in the smaller public spaces, that we're talking about, the small urban parks, Washington, we have this. This is just my bias, not Gensler's. We have this wonderful tradition in DC of green spaces that are very green. And the Park Service has always had a certain attitude toward that. But urban parks require a little bit of a kiosk where you can eat, and something that makes it a little more active than just sitting on the grass. At the very least, as Teresa noted, the opportunity to have a Zumba class or a concert,
Right.
pop-up group, just allow, I'd love to see more drum circles in various places, and there, you could lay things out for that. So let's
also in Meridian Park.
Yeah. Yep. So
I'd like to piggyback on that, if I may. This is Maybell. There are spaces like the park area that stretches from the Arc in Southeast Washington, where I live, all the way over to South Capitol Street and the Patricia Harris school complex.
Yep.
And it's called Oxen Run. It's an Oxen Run park. And it's very nice. It has been redeveloped. It has been paved nicely. There are lovely lights and whatnot. But I don't feel safe doing it. When I go walking, I go to Anacostia Park. I've been going to the Arboretum now. I've been going to Mount Vernon Trail, Sligo Creek Trail, places where I feel more safe. And I should be able to do it right in my backyard, but I don't feel safe there. Now, it may indeed be safe, but those neighborhoods through which it runs have a poor reputation for safety. And there needs to be some kind of a sense that we can be safe when we go walking, in addition to the fact that I'm not a youngster anymore. And when I need to go to the toilet, or when I need other kinds of amenities like that, they should be accessible as well. And there is no place in that, I think it's probably close to about a mile stretch, 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles, where you're really out of luck if in fact you end up having to have a bio break. So I'd like us to think about that as well. I mean, you want to make things intergenerational. And if you've got small children, or if you got seasoned adults like myself, you're going to need an array of amenities, both for toileting and safety and all of that, that need to accompany those spaces.
You know, Maybelle, that's my, by the way, when I was a kid, I grew up in Congress Heights, right near that park. I was just over there recently, and you're right. I just noticed it's partly having amenities in the park that attract people, because, and you know, some space like Anacostia Park, although it needs a lot of work, is wide open, and a lot of people tend to go there for recreation. There are always ball games going on there, and you know, and tennis and all that. And some of these others are a little more isolated. And the fact, you know, it's wonderful to have these great rural oases in the city. I feel like we need more urban things that do recognize that people need to eat, they need to go to the bathroom, they need places to sit. And there too, you know, if you have a pop-up concert, if you have a lot of people hanging around, it will be safer, I think.
Sally Burke asked, do you consider the view in Tyson's to be walkable?
The view to itself, yes. Now, is it walkable to Tyson's Mall? No. You know, you know, we worked on the borough and we've worked on the view, and in between those two sites, which are adjacent to the metro and are right adjacent to one another, there's a bike share. And, you know, going up from the borough is quite a big hill. And I've never seen in all my time there someone on a bicycle or one of the bike stalls empty. So I think, you know, Tyson's has a long way to go to be, for people's mental state to be considered walkable, because people just aren't walking there. But I think if we, you know, looking at communities and the people that have gone into the borough, I consider that walkable. I consider the view walkable within itself. You know, can someone from the borough who's living there walk over to the view to see a performance? Yes, but beyond that, you're probably not walking. Or some of the crescent that's over there, you could probably walk. So I think part of it is, you know, can Tyson's get to the mindset that there are walkable areas? But Tyson's as a whole, you know, there's these communities of walkability, but Tyson's as a whole is not yet connecting those areas to be walkable, and the distances are quite far. I've not seen a lot of people on the bike shares, but I'm at least having the bike shares there starts to put that in people's minds that, hey, I could take the bike to go from, you know, Tyson Central over to the borough.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with Tyson's is that there's some big gaps in the pedestrian infrastructure. Now, like there's places totally without sidewalks. You know, you can't go from the metro station safely, really, over to Silverline Center, Wash Freed's project. And that's something I think Tyson's or Fairfax County really needs to do, is take a look at some targeted public investment in the area to bring Tyson's together. Because I think until they do that, it's just going to be a bit here and a bit there.
I agree, Robert. I was walking from a Cap One event at Cap One at the brewery over there to the metro. And I was trying to get to the quickest entrance to the metro, not using the one that I always use, because I don't know why, but I was going over to the one at, I wasn't using the Cap One entrance. I was using the entrance over at Tyson's Corner. And I was sort of gymnasticking to get to a sidewalk, but looking at those sidewalks going, I am not staying on the sidewalk and double my route to get to the metro. So I'm just going to live on the edge and cut across this street and jump over this curb and not go to a walk sign to cut my trip in half to get to the metro entrance. So I completely agree that there's these, and part of it is that there are areas that are still undeveloped that are waiting for developers to have to put that infrastructure in themselves. And I think it's true that, you know, the city should, the county and city should start to look at those areas and how they can connect them before a development comes to do kind of the greater long-term planning.
You know how the traffic engineers have those service levels? They'll tell you that your development's going to take you from service level D to F or something. I think we should have pedestrian service levels should be able to say, oh my God, this is pedestrian service level F. We gotta, and that wouldn't be because it's too clogged. It would be because you can't use it. I think that would be, I will say there are some suburban downtown, so-called downtowns that have done a better job of that, partly because they don't have such huge roads cutting through them. But, National Landing, Crystal City before that was doing a better job. Rosslyn has been working on it, and Bethesda's sort of tied together, and you can walk around pretty well.
Yeah.
Pamela,
so at the end of the day, Tyson's Corner is, a huge development, right? Yeah. It's probably as much office space as Washington, D.C. has at this point. So it was developed, I lived there when there were 2-lane roads crossing at 7 and 123, so I've seen a little bit of change since then and done a bunch of projects there, not as many as Bob, but certainly Robert, but certainly a few. And it's going to be a series of villages at best, because the road infrastructure and now the above grade metro system are limiting it, and there's almost no way to overcome that. So, thinking about Tyson's series of connected villages is a better thought than saying, I'm going to make this into a city. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right, David. And that's why I'm saying the view is its own community, and it's walkable within. And you could maybe hop to the next one. But other than that, you're taking the metro to go to Tyson's Corner or to the McLean, to the Wegmans site.
Yeah, one thing, when we designed, when the Silver Line was being designed, it was obviously that was a hot issue for the project, which could not do the entire pedestrian network in Tyson's. That was dependent upon the county and the development industry. But one thing we did incorporate into the design, which is different than other metro stations, is that you can access during operating hours the pedestrian bridges over 7 and over 123 without actually having to go into the stations. And that was a big design feature that changed, for metro, that you could, so the view when dealing with the previous landowner, you can get over to the south side of Route 7 if you want to, and not have to, fight the traffic of 7 and 123 in particular, in that we work very hard with Macerich and Tyson's Corner Center to link it directly into to the station, which now will carry it over also to the other side. So yeah. I mean, when we were working with Macerich on that site, the distance from metro to that community is minuscule. It's shorter than a football field. And I think, the other side will get there too on that site, right? It just needs the rest of the development to fill in.
Pamela, would you like to ask your question out loud?
If another question, can I ask a question, please?
Sure. Please go ahead.
Okay, Julie, first of all, I applaud what Abel said about the amenities going for young and old generations. And second, I hark back to a comment that Bob made at the outset, that many of the things that we're talking about have been evolving over decades. It's just that they're crystallizing in different ways. And when you look at all this together, it seems to me that we have a three-corner hat. We have the professionals, we have the neighborhood, and then we have the government, the controlling government. And in the controlling government, we need a lever to bring them more into the situation that we're describing here, the 20-minute radius or whatever it is. And it seems to me one of those catalysts is the point that was made in the diagram, namely affordable housing. Affordable housing has arrived. There's obviously a great deal of interest in this. There's obviously a great deal of investment in this. And that's the way to bring all three corners of the hat together.
Okay. All right. So Pamela had asked, have you considered more options for employing people from the marginalized communities to ensure they're involved from the beginning? and to ensure that those ideas are utilized for planning in other areas of the city.
So I guess I'll say I'm thinking in the projects I've been involved in, we have, and Teresa noted this, we've generally hired people from, we partnered with people in the community to be a part of our project team. There's often these days, we get RFPs, to the credit of DC and many cities, require some kind of a community engagement plan, which also often means having somebody who can help you do that. I will admit, there are some times when community engagement people I've seen are professional community engagement people, and they too are reaching out to the community. The idea that you should make sure you have somebody from the community itself sitting on your team, probably a really good idea.
Okay. Any other questions, comments you'd like to share with group?
Well, in that vein, the 11th Street Bridge, I'm just now forgetting the name of the guy that's been pushing that wonderful park. They have done such a great outreach in the community, involving them and employing them and feeding them and all kinds of things. It's a wonderful local example of getting local people involved.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. It's Scott Kratz who's
that's right, Scott.
Talking to. He's done an amazing job.
And Don Edwards, one of our members who was previously on the call, has done a lot of that participation facilitation.
Huh.
Any other comments? Well, we want to thank you so much, Teresa and Bob. This has been great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Plus Bob wanted to see all his old Lambda Alpha friends. I had to bring him along.
Right.
I wanted to mention that we recorded this, and I'll be sending the link to people who would like to watch it in an email, and we'll also post it on the new website, which is another opportunity to say, go look at the new website, because you'll like it, I hope.
So again, our next meeting is April 23rd. We'd love to see you back again. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much.
Bye. Stay safe. Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.